Black magic, criminals, banished priests, and demons taking revenge. Not the usual imagery that comes to mind when you think of Bali, the famous holiday island in Indonesia. But there are some wild stories that have taken place there, and whatever your beliefs may be on witchcraft or paranormal phenomena, I'm sure you'll find this story as mystifying and spooky as the poor group of surfers who were involved. Hey guys, welcome to Ben Planet, where I tell you true stories of humans in abnormal predicaments. Tales that will twist your mind. And this story is no exception. If you love a good campfire story, but you don't have a campfire, hit subscribe. I don't have a campfire either, but I will provide you good stories. All right, get comfortable. You ready to hear a story? Just a short boat ride from Bali's shores lies a smaller island called Nusa Penida. Back in the 1900s, when the Dutch colonised Indonesia, their maps called the island Bandit Island, and there's a reason for this. Much like England originally used Australia as a dumping ground for its criminals, Bali too used Nusa Penida as its own version of a convict settlement. People that fell on the wrong side of the law were banished from Bali and sent to Nusa Penida, exiled and forced to live amongst themselves. And it wasn't just thieves and regular criminals being sent there. Many people practiced black magic, and those who were caught were exiled to Nusa Penida. Spiritual practice plays a major role in Balinese culture. The battle between good and evil is a very real belief system, and maintaining the correct balance is essential for the Balinese people. One famous story talks about an old Balinese king called Machaling, who became a great lord of black magic. He was exiled and sentenced to live on Penida. His dark practices were so powerful that in revenge he would send sickness and disease to Bali. There's a red temple on Penida that is believed to house Machaling's spirit, and even today Balinese are too scared to say his name out loud. So as you can imagine, Nusa Penida had a hell of a lot of hardcore dudes living in one confined area, and a bunch of them were deeply involved in the dark mystic arts. The name Nusa Penida itself means island of priests, and stories of black magic have poured from its shores, even inspiring this comic book by the creator of Tintin. So flash forward to the 80s. A time when tourism hadn't come close to hitting Bali the way it has today, but it was gaining a reputation as an incredible place to travel for adventure and for backpackers, and especially for Australian surfers. Bali's surf breaks are enough to make any surfer drool. So one group of Aussie mates in the late 80s who were in Bali enjoying the waves were keen to take their surfing skills to some uncharted territory. They'd heard about some amazing surf breaks off the coast of an island nearby called Nusa Penida. So they chartered a sailboat and decided to do a 5-day trip out there to catch some waves. All 6 of them boarded the boat and took off, making it to Penida and sailing around the coastline, surfing along the way. On the second day, they found a perfect spot to drop anchor, dive into the crystal clear water with their boards and surf the waves. It was an unbelievable day, beautiful blue skies, tropical ocean swells, and nobody else around to fight the waves for. They were roughly 100 meters off the coast, surfing in front of a small inlet, where tall rocky cliffs led into a secluded white sandy beach. A recluse slice of heaven that didn't have any man-made tracks or trails leading down into it whatsoever. Just a beach that led to a steep escarpment of rocks and shrubs, then cliff walls that led up to thick green jungle and distant hills reaching to the horizon. Over the next few hours they were absolutely loving life, catching waves or hanging out on their surfboards and chatting at the back of the break. At one point they noticed one of the guys, Steve, paddle in towards the beach after coming off a wave rather than head back out for another run. They assumed he was taking a break or going to take a closer look at the beach and chill out for a while, so it didn't seem unusual. Once he got to the beach and walked up onto the sand though, he placed his board down and then continued moving up to the back of the beach where it started to slope up. He then disappeared into a small patch of trees and thick bushes. The guys watching him started joking around. Well, Steve's taking his personal toilet space rather seriously, but nobody really paid too much attention before getting on with their own fun. Eventually though, after they'd all eaten on the boat and the hours clicked over, the sun began dropping in the sky and Steve still hadn't re-emerged from that area at the back of the beach. They all joked about what he was up to, but after a while, concern began to grow as they wanted to head off to another area while it was still light, and Steve was still a no-show. Impatience then turned to serious worry that Steve may have had a fall and hurt himself, needing their help. So as a group, they all jumped back into the water, swam to shore, and headed to the area where he was last seen. But this is where things took a strange turn. As they pushed through the small area of shrubs that Steve had walked through, they realised that beyond them was nothing but a harsh rocky slope leading to the base of a cliff wall, a wall so steep and lacking in anything to hold onto it would be impossible to climb. They agreed that there was no way Steve went up, so they all spread out and began doing a sweep of the area, thinking he may be lying somewhere unconscious and unable to hear their calls. Moving from one end of the small cove to the other, they looked at every square bit of sand, dirt, rock and cliff, but Steve was nowhere to be seen. The entire length of the beach was only around 80 metres or 250 feet, so there wasn't really a lot of space to hide in, let alone get lost. Beyond the small area of trees and shrubs, along with a few shallow caves where the cliffs met the sand, there was nowhere he could possibly have wandered off to. They all tried desperately to scale various parts of the cliff line, but it was absolutely impossible. And on the other side of the beach inlet, the cliffs continued on like fortress walls that reached directly into the deep blue ocean. There was literally nowhere Steve could have gone. They desperately called out for him, but it was pointless. He simply wasn't there. Grabbing their boards, they began sweeping the waterline around the beach. The only real possibility at this point was that Steve had gone for a swim and drowned. As devastating as that was, and as strange as it seemed considering his relationship with the ocean as a surfer, it was looking like the only option for what was going on. But soon enough, the sun dropped and it became harder to see anything. Eventually, they had to call the search off and make their way back to the boat, confused and eerily concerned. After a quick chat over their options, the group decided it would be best to sail the boat to the nearest village and ask the locals to help by forming a search team. As there was nobody inhabiting the side of Nusa Penida that they were on that they knew of, the nearest place to sail would be on Nusa Lembongan, a smaller island that lay closer to Bali. They left Steve's surfboard on the sand at the back of the beach as a marker to recognise the right spot when they returned. Raising the sails, they journeyed around the coast towards Nusa Lembongan as the sky dropped into darkness around them. At this point, everyone was stressed, tired, and extremely worried. It was also dangerous to be boating around through unfamiliar ocean territory at night, so as soon as they saw the lights of houses on a patch of coastline, they pulled in and ran to find help. Finding some locals, they did their best to explain the situation and asked for help in finding their friend. But the more they explained the position of where Steve had gone missing over on Nusa Penida, the colder the response was from anyone they spoke to. "Forget your friend, he is gone now, not coming back," people were saying, which completely took them by surprise. How could anyone give up that quickly? Surely a search party needed to be formed to track down Steve's whereabouts and bring him back to safety. Why couldn't anyone see that? But everyone they spoke to just gave them the same answer. Once they learned of the area where Steve had gone missing, they would shut down any attempts at a search and rescue effort and back away from the boys with a look of concerned fear in their eyes. What the hell is going on here, they were all thinking. But they couldn't give up. So for hours and hours they argued and struggled to relate their story through language barriers to whoever they could, but it was the same response time and time again. Eventually, finding a group of fishermen getting their boats ready for a night trawl, the boys thought they'd found the right crew. Surely these guys would help, considering they're used to the ocean and would know the coastline of both the islands. But again, they refused to go anywhere near the area where Steve went missing on Nusa Penida. Even when the boys offered large amounts of money, the fishermen just shook their heads and backed away as though they were being offered a meal of poison. There were only so many people they could beg for help before they ran out of options. So heading back to the boat, they got on the radio and reported Steve missing to the Bali authorities, who told them that they would send a team the next day to help search the area. After attempting a small amount of anxious sleep, the boys jumped back into action before first light and began sailing. As the sun cracked the horizon, they pulled into the spot where they'd moored the day before, somberly grabbed their boards to catch a wave into shore, and began a second search. For hours, they combed the small beach and duck dived through the waves surrounding the inlet. But at this point, the most any of them expected to find was Steve's body in the water. With no luck and the heat of the day kicking in hard, they decided to head back to the boat to rest until the Bali search and rescue team arrived for their official search. They began quietly lying down on various parts of the deck, completely exhausted, when one of the boys broke the silence and yelled, "There he is!" They all jumped up and ran to the boat's edge to see the distant but familiar figure of Steve standing beside his surfboard where they had stuck it end down into the sand at the back of the beach. He was facing them, looking in their direction. Elated to know he was standing there without any injuries they could see, they all yelled with relief and excitement as they watched him slowly make his way down the beach, pull his board up into his arms and steadily move into the water. As they kept yelling out to him, it became increasingly obvious that Steve wasn't really reacting to them at all. In fact, he seemed eerily unresponsive. His movement was slow and steady, but he didn't look up once and wave back at them. They watched as he quietly paddled his way across the top of the water towards the boat, and despite still calling out to him, he showed no signs of hearing them whatsoever. As their cries from the boat died down, all the guys just stared at Steve, kind of mesmerized by his approach, waiting for answers. But as Steve edged closer, he suddenly stopped paddling, and with his head still aimed downwards, looking into the water in front of his board, he pulled his hands up to his sides, clenched the edges of his board with his fingers, and slowly pushed his shoulders skyward, arching his back and lifting his head to stare directly at them all on the boat. And when he did, the first thing that they were all hit with was Steve's eyes. They were completely silver. The entire exposed area of each eyeball was just a bright, reflective silver color, with no pupils, no iris, just a haunting, unnatural, completely non-human looking silver glaze. His face was expressionless, void of emotion, drained of life. As everyone gasped, "What the fuck?" Steve, as calmly as he had pushed himself up, lowered himself back down into paddling position, turned himself back around to point towards land, and began paddling back to the beach. Everyone screamed at him again, "What are you doing? Get back here!" Some of them eventually jumped into the water to swim out to him, but with his head start, they didn't catch up to him before he pulled himself back onto dry sand, lay the board down on the beach, and made his way back up the embankment, once again disappearing into the same patch of trees and shrubs where they had last seen him 24 hours earlier. Only this time, he would never be seen again. Alright guys, that's it for today's story. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed it and it entertained you, please hit that like. If you haven't subscribed yet, do so I can keep telling you stories. Stay safe out there, and until the next story, stay bent.